we've had a big meeting up here. I'm so excited, and I know you're excited to hear James. So I'll make this short, but I wanted to let y'all know that a meeting like this, where we bring in a keynote speaker, we probably won't have any more of these until after elections. And so we're doing a new game plan. So remember in 2022, we had, first of all, the momentum in Charleston County was amazing to flip the school board. I mean, it was the biggest flip nationwide. And, well, it was incredible. So we had small meetings at people's homes, and, you know, I would show up and speak whenever I could. Corey, you were at one of them, actually, I remember.
Yep.
Yeah, and so what we're going to try to do is we have sign-up sheets in the back. There's 3 different sheets because of Michelle Weber, that's running for District 6 School Board, Michelle Faust, that's running for District 8 School Board, and of course Ed Kelly in District 2. So, oh yeah, woo, woo, woo. Right, so we're looking for volunteers that want to, you can be maybe a neighborhood captain. You know, I did that for my neighborhood in 2022. I can't do that this year because none of the candidates are, you know, in my district. But, or you could do even your precinct. So on August 1st, Ashley, where are you, Ashley Sechel? Can you stand up? Do y'all, yeah, she's great. So she is the volunteer coordinator for Charleston County Republican Party. And she's been doing a fantastic job. And she had an event at her home, and I think there were about 100 people there. And I made it, but barely. I was not feeling good. So I wanted to be there, and I, you know, just to say a few words. And there were several candidates that showed up, and Ed Kelly was there, and it's very effective. And if you want to get involved at the precinct level, she has the forms, right, and the QR code. And Ashley will help you. It's not as hard as you think. And these meetings like this is real grassroots. And it is the way to get people involved and to get them informed. Because some people still have their head in the sands. They don't understand what's going on. And then, thank you, right? So there's Ashley. If you need to talk to Ashley. And then Jessica. Where's Jessica Ziegler? Okay. Thank you, Jessica. So she had a meeting at her house.
Ask how many people were at my house. Raise your hand if you were at my house on Saturday.
Oh, look at that. You see? Woo, woo, woo. That's fantastic. So they're at her house. Okay. Thank you so much. So yeah, if you have an event at your home, then the candidates will show up. And like I said, I'll try to show up if I can. And the only reason I wasn't at Jessica's is because I was out of town. Some of y'all may know that my dad was diagnosed just recently with advanced lung cancer. So I'm going to be involved taking care of my dad right now. And that's another reason why, like, it's just really hard to pull these big meetings together. So yes, if people can step up, let's get this going at this grassroots level. And I want to tell you this real quick. If you get pushback from your neighbors, wait, Moms for Liberty, those book banners, you know, all these lies that they're hearing, if anyone brings up the book banning stuff, just remember, one of the arguments they'll say is that children need to see themselves in books that they read. So what you say to that is, well, if children are seeing themselves in these types of books that we would like to get out of schools, then they've been sexually molested. Just remember that, okay? Really? That's where we're going? We want kids to recognize that, you know, see themselves as being raped or whatever. And then the other thing is this is a great argument to say, we're not allowed to show rated R movies in schools. And you cannot show sexually explicit videos and play that type of music in schools, right? So why would we allow these books? So just remember that, and then you just have to ignore the lies. And the lies are never going to stop because the media is on their side, right? It's never going to stop. So we have to stand in our truth, and the truth will prevail. Because I know y'all have seen where a few people have just received cease and desist and maybe a lawsuit for running their mouth. And I'm telling you, they're dropping like flies. So we just keep steady, joyful warriors. Just keep speaking your truth and spread it, y'all. Spread it like wildfires like we did in 2022. Because we have got to keep Ed Kelly on this board, to keep the majority. Okay? Yes. Because I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to let them say a few words before James speaks. Gets up here. The 3 school board candidates, because just remember this, y'all. I know there was a little rocky start in the beginning because none of them had ever run for anything before, okay? But now the 5, the majority, they're rocking and rolling. We have a wonderful superintendent, Anita Huggins, and we need candidates that want to work with her, that want to support her. And so I know that these 3 districts, their opponents are against Anita, and that we cannot go through that again. And the teachers got raises, $8,000 raises this year. That's incredible because they're managing the budget better. That's really good. And don't forget the EL. Do you remember the horrible ELA curriculum that was just saturated with critical race theory? We worked so hard to get that out of our schools, and thank God we had the majority so they could vote it out and vote in Common Core, which, by the way, that is where's Mike Lyons?
Common Core.
I mean core knowledge. Core knowledge. See, I'm a joke. Not to be confused with Common Core, which is why we think the Democrats voted for it, because they voted for the core knowledge. Mike Lyons is here somewhere. He used to be chairman of up in Connecticut on his board of ed, and the stats in his district changed drastically when they implemented core knowledge. So guess what? CCSD has core knowledge now. It's fantastic. Okay, let's move on to our keynote speaker. So, okay, James Lindsay, an American author, mathematician, and professional troublemaker. Dr. James Lindsay has written 10 books spanning a range of subjects including education, Marxism, and postmodern theory. He is a leading expert on critical race theory, which leads him to reject it completely. He is the founder of New Disclosures and currently promoting his new book, The Queering of the American Child, and his documentary film, Beneath Sheep's Clothing. He has spoken all over the world, including in the Library of Congress, outside the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, at the Oxford Union, and in the European Union Parliament. And I know you're leaving tomorrow for Korea, right? He travels a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so blessed to have him again. We love you, James. James Lindsay.
I gotta start a stopwatch for your safety. You didn't want to spend the night. Thank you guys so much for coming. I am always thrilled to be in Charleston, so I was thrilled when Tara invited me again. It's one of my favorite places to come. I think it's like the 4th or 5th time I've had the pleasure of coming down. Turns out y'all have good food. You do a pretty good bridge too, it turns out. It's really nice. Actually, I really do love coming here though, and it's really exciting. And what she said is true. I am leaving in the morning to fly to Korea to speak this my next talk. And so, actually, it's kind of an interesting thing because what I want to tell you, I mean, we just heard it. Actually, we literally just heard it. But we're in an interesting moment. I've been going around, all over the place, telling people that in a very real sense. Now, obviously, we got this wicked election coming up, but in a very real sense, we're standing at the turning of the tide. I mean, Joe Biden called it an inflection point in history, and he said that a lot hangs on this election because we don't know which way it's going to go. And he's right, it is an inflection point in history. But as far as this ideology, this Marxist ideology, this evolved, mutated communism that's designed to take down our children and our society goes, the public is giving up on it very quickly. In fact, the public is turning on it very quickly. And you're hearing, you guys have had such tremendous success here fighting back in South Carolina, that Tara and I were talking. I said, Tara, what do you want me to talk about? And she said, well, just say everything Tara said is right. And that's really what she said, kind of. She said, reiterate these points and about how important it is to back these candidates for the school board, how important it is to stay active, to stay involved. So everything she said, but she also told me that, I was telling her, I said, well, it's really exciting with Moms for Liberty right now. I was just with the national founder, Tiffany Justice, literally over the weekend. I spoke in Chicago and then I spoke in Nashville over the weekend, and I came here on Monday. My wife saw me for a few hours in between, and Tiffany is thrilled. And then there's a representative there that's from Illinois, one of the, chapter chairs up there that's doing wonderful things, and there's one from Wisconsin that's doing wonderful things. That's Shannon Adcock and Scarlett Johnson, if you wonder what their names are. And it turns out their enthusiasm was through the roof, because I don't know, some of you will have heard that there was a Supreme Court decision recently about this Title IX rewrite, and it's not all it's cracked up to be, but it's good. It's a big step in the right direction. But before that, a significant court issued a full, very broad scope preliminary injunction against the Title IX rewrite that extends to every school that has a child whose parents are a member of Moms for Liberty. They were the plaintiffs, and that's who it extends to. And it turns out, I'm telling Tara about this, and as I'm telling her that in Illinois and Wisconsin and across the country, talking to those three women, Scarlett and Shannon and Tiffany, what I learned is across the country right now, Moms for Liberty is experiencing an incredible boom, because it turns out that the injunction is written in such a way that if somebody makes a Moms for Liberty chapter here now, after the court decision, it still applies to them and their kids. So people are signing up for Moms for Liberty at a rate right now so fast that they can't even process the applications for chapter chairs. It's the biggest explosion in growth that they've had since the beginning. Meanwhile, Scarlett and Shannon were telling me, and Tiffany echoed it from her experience at the national level, that in their local communities in Wisconsin and Illinois, the attitude toward Moms for Liberty basically flipped like a switch overnight. It went from, oh, Moms for Liberty, slander, lie, trash talk, bad. Of course, the left is still saying this, somewhat. But all of a sudden, all of the people who were silent and afraid to speak up have come out of the woodwork. Oh, thank you, can we join? And they've had something like a 20-25% increase in membership across Wisconsin just in a couple of weeks because of this. I'm telling Tara this, she's like, what? That's not happening. What? South Carolina. Turns out you guys already have laws. Your Attorney General, if I got that right, your Attorney General stood up and said, heck no, that's not happening. This rewriting Title IX is not happening to South Carolinians. And already defended you. So you guys are in such a lucky state that your Attorney General did it statewide and you don't have to have this preliminary injunction, but you missed out on the enthusiasm in terms of that Moms for Liberty is changing the world, literally changing the lives of children all over the country in states that don't have such great attorneys general. So Moms for Liberty is on the ascendant. We have excellent people fighting back, standing directly in the gap between this ideology and your children. And make no mistake, this ideology is after your children. And I honestly think, I travel this country, I travel all over North America, I travel around the world, sometimes not as much as it sounds like I do. And this is changing very quickly. I'm going to Korea tomorrow to speak for a group called Build Up Korea, because the organizers of that entity are trying to train Korean youth to reject woke before it takes over Korea. It's not there yet.
Yeah.
So we're bringing in Americans. In this case, I'm speaking with some nobody called Donald Trump Jr. To try to train up Korean youth in actually literally American values, to resist woke, to understand what woke is and understand what liberty and freedom are, and what the values of those are, and where they come from in our country, and what we stand for. And so it's all very exciting. We're at the turning of the tide of this monstrosity. Of course, the institutions, and very in particular the schools, are not quite coming along with us yet, and certainly the Democratic Party. I'll just point out, by the way, the Democratic Party, I want to point out something that our Madam Vice President, to whom I'm very grateful at the moment, by the way, I'll explain in a minute. Madam Vice President yesterday stood up and she gave her allegedly inspiring speech at the DNC, and one of the things she said was that what unites them on their side is not a commitment to the founding principles of America, but a shared vision of America's future. Which turns out to be straight out of Karl Marx. In his 18th Premier, Louis Bonaparte, he talks about how the social revolutions of the 19th century, by which he means the Marxist revolutions, have to draw their inspiration, he says, from the future, not from the past. So she's not committing to the principles of America, and she said so on this stage. She's instead committing to a shared vision for a new future for this country, which would be saying that we're going to be able to see what can be unburdened by what has been. Which is the beating heart of Marxist ideology, and I went viral. You can look up my video on that. I'm not going to repeat it all for you here. Maybe we might be able to. We'll see.
Yeah, tell me a little bit.
All right, Tara said I have to. Yes, ma'am. So I get all the time, by the way, I say in the airports, yes sir, yes ma'am, or whatever. People say, are you in the military? And I say, no. Unlike Governor Waltz, I don't steal valor. I say, no, I'm just Southern. And so, okay, so I already told you the key from Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, that unburdened by what can, or able to see what can be unburdened by what has been is a Marxist theme. But it comes up again and again and again and again and again. It actually is going to segue into the school, so this actually works. You can find it in the Communist Manifesto. If you read the first paragraph of the Communist Manifesto and compare it to the last paragraph of the main body of that, there's a bunch of appendices where he rants about people he doesn't like. But there's a main body that ends. And if you read the first and last paragraph, it's basically the same thing. History is made through the conflict of antagonistic classes. And the point of this is that we're going to do away with the way that the past was so that we can move forward into a new future that we can imagine. And you see it in his explanation of communism that he puts in his economic philosophic manuscripts. You see it in Mao Zedong's Smash the Four Olds campaign during the Cultural Revolution. I actually have a poster somebody sent me from the Maoist era, from the Shanghai Red Guard, and it actually says, which sounds a little bit less like like Kamala than like something else, but it says, smash the old world, build the new world. And it shows a communist swinging a big hammer at probably religious icons or something, buildings or whatever, and smashing a pile of rubble. But it sounds like, you know, smash the old world and build back better, as it turns out, which is exactly what that is. And that's, of course, the Great Leap Forward, right? That's the slogan that they're using this year, Forward. Turns out the first periodical that Lenin published was called Forward in Russian. The first periodical that Mussolini published when he took off with the fascist movement was called Avanti, which is forward in Italian. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
The word forward in Chinese, which is like Qinghai or something like that, appears on like every single one of their big propaganda posters. Because Marxism is a religion that believes it is moving forward to the destiny of man, which is to enter the Garden of Eden again on his own terms, by building it around himself. And that can only happen by transforming who we are, to have what some Marxists call a qualitative change in human nature, which of course isn't going to work. And that's why it never works. It's not a failed economic system, it's a failed religion. And it's coming after your soul. But it turns out it can capture adult souls. It does capture adult souls, but it's easier to get kids. And so I published a book earlier this year called The Queering of the American Child, just in the same line of able to see what can be, unburdened by what has been. One of the quotes we put in this book, which is about queer theory in education, which I know that's two things I'm going to have to unpack a little bit for you. Queer theory in education, but you have this relatively famous queer theorist named Jose Esteban Munoz, and he actually says queerness is not here yet, queerness is a horizon, we cannot yet touch queerness, hopefully one day we can, but you know, we've got all of this problem with the current existing set of norms and expectations in society, values in society we have to overcome first. So in other words, queerness means being able to see what can be, which I think looks like a drag queen unburdened by what has been. And I am doing very much the Solve et Coagula hand motion that Kamala does every time for whatever weird reason. If you don't know what Solve et Coagula means, it's what's tattooed on Baphomet's arms. It means dissolve and coagulate, or dissolve and remake, or build back better. On the famous statue. And I don't know why she always raises her one hand and she puts her other hand down while she does it, but she sure does. It's really peculiar. So thank you, by the way, Madam Vice President and Governor Waltz. I'm not kidding. I'm grateful to them for putting communism on the ballot. And communism in the dead center of a national conversation that should have started 5 years ago, but we all got mocked, we got made fun of, we got called conspiracy theorists, we got told we don't know what communism is, we got told we don't understand Marxism for 5 years. But we were right. So thank you for finally proving us out and letting us start this conversation, wherever you are out there, Madam Vice President, thank you. Evil, I was talking with Eric Metaxas the other day, and he said, Satan, by definition, is foolish, and so evil will always out itself. It will always make a mistake, because it is, by definition, a fool. And so I think that we see that on display. They're calling it joy this year.
That's so funny. Yeah.
So, queer theory in education, what an unholy marriage. This is the ideology that you have to stand in the way of, and what you have behind you if you're standing facing it to fight is your children. And it's called queer theory. Like, just the words should be like bubbling around in your head like something's badly wrong here. So I'll just briefly tell you what queer theory is, and I'll briefly tell you how it got into education, which is what the book is about. I encourage you to read it. If you've read some of my other books, by the way, I didn't actually write the majority of this book. My writing partner, Logan Lansing, did, and he writes a lot easier than I do, so it's easy. It's the easiest book I've ever published in terms of how it reads. It's easy to read. Teenagers could read it and follow it, no problem. Adults can read it and follow it, no problem. I keep hearing how easy it is to read, so I encourage you, if you want to know about this, to check that out. But what's queer theory? So queer theory is a deranged version of Marxism that uses, rather than economic status as the dividing line in society, it uses literally being normal as the dividing line in society. It comes along and it says, well, some people have declared themselves to be normal based on some self-serving definition, and they've excluded everybody else from normalcy according to that definition so that they can have privilege in society and oppress the others. Marx, on the first paragraph, by the way, of the Communist Manifesto, says that all of history is the history of contending classes, class antagonism, class warfare from one class to another. And he gives a huge list of possible class antagonisms, and then he finishes with, in a word, oppressor versus oppressed. So this is just a remaking of oppressor versus oppressed, where people who think of themselves as normal, as in not queer, or freaks, or deviants, or perverts, or worse. That's the line. So the people who think of themselves as normal are oppressors by the virtue of the fact that they have defined normal to mean themselves. And the people who are excluded by that are therefore oppressed by the very concept of normalcy and decency in society. Also, legitimacy. The actual definition of queer was given by David Halperin in 1995 in a book called Saint Foucault, which lionizes the postmodern philosopher and pedophile Michel Foucault. And the definition of queer is that queer is whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, and the dominant. Whatever is at odds. He says that it is a purely oppositional position. He starts that paragraph by saying, the first three words of that paragraph are, unlike gay identity. Because he says gay identity, though we don't know what it is rooted in something to do with reality. He calls it a positive fact. And then he says that queer is not based on any positive truth or any stable reality. It is purely oppositional position. Position is a fancy word that means politics. It's the political position you take. And it is to be opposed to normalcy and legitimacy. We can throw out dominant because they think everything they don't like is dominance. So that's redundant for them. So what that means is, it's not possible to be a queer person. Every time they've told you that this is about queer children or queer people being able to see themselves in a book or whatever else, there's no such thing. Queer is a political position. There are gay people, that's true, we all know that's true. There are people who have other disorders. Paraphilias, as they're sometimes called, to be polite. Autogynephilia is a very big word that lies beneath many of the male to female trans characters. There are these things, these are real, but queer is a deliberate political position to defy normalcy. And like I said, this has old roots. Queer theory it goes back way before 1995 with David Halperin. It goes back before Judith Butler in 1990 and 1993 when she's basically writing, the essence of Judith Butler's idea could be summarized in this 6-word sentence. Drag is life, life is drag. So the deal is, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, and it doesn't matter if you present as a man or a woman, you're always performing your gender, you're always doing drag. So if you're a woman and you present feminine, well, you're performing femininity, and you're creating a belief that if you're a woman, you're supposed to look and act and dress and carry yourself a certain way. And if you're a man and you present masculine, well, you're performing male drag, you're actually a male drag king. The only people actually who get it are the people who are actually drag kings and drag queens, which means they're kind of enlightened and we're all in the dark. We're in Plato's cave and they're the enlightened people who know more than everybody and therefore get to be Plato's philosopher kings and tell us how the world works, which is why Ketanji Brown Jackson, when asked by Senator Marshall Blackburn, one of my senators, what is a woman, said, I have to ask an expert. I'm not kidding, that's what's going on. You have to ask an expert, these enlightened gender theorists, she's a biologist, but an enlightened gender theorist is necessary to say who is and who isn't a woman. This is easy to prove. How can I prove it? Well, let's say that your 6-year-old tells a school counselor, notice that this is some new psychological position in schools that didn't exist when you went to school. There were no school counselors. We had guidance counselors.
Right.
They were a bunch of different things. It's a very different thing. Sounds like it's the same. Oh, it's just one different word. It's a completely different program. They're not guiding your children into career services in the future. They are actually doing counseling with your children. So let's say your 6-year-old son tells the school counselor, maybe not in South Carolina, maybe in South Carolina, but certainly in other states, certainly in California, where you could lose your kids over this. Says, your 6-year-old son says, I think I'm a little girl. Well, that absolutely has to be affirmed. The school counselor is absolutely going to say, wow, that's so stunning and brave of you to say so. Let's go. Let's get you in the GSA after school. Let's do this. Let's do that. We're going to get you affirmed. Let's protect you from your parents. Let's get the state involved. Blah, blah, blah. Right? So that 6-year-old, somehow these people know immediately that the 6-year-old claiming a different sex, or different gender is a made-up word, is absolutely right. That person, that same gender counselor or whatever at the school or at a clinic or anything else, is going to take, say, Caitlyn Jenner or Bruce Jenner's word for it when he says, I'm Caitlyn. Absolutely true, unchallengeable, could lose your job for misgendering Bruce Jenner, right? But if Donald Trump came out at his next rally and says, I'm the first transgender woman running for president, they'd say he's making a mockery of trans, it's not real, and they would not accept his claim. So it's totally up to the experts to decide whose claim on gender is true and whose is not. Why? Because there's no observable fact in reality you could actually look to determine it. It's only actually determined if you agree with the ideology or not. And if you agree with the ideology, that means that they perceive that you're doing so in a way that upsets the apple cart on the normal, the legitimate, and the dominant, in a way where you could be leaned into or are already leaning into an intentional opposition to normalcy, legitimacy, and dominance. And the goals are the typical Marxist goals. It's to bust up society, cause division, cause confusion, and cause the chaos in which they can place policies like we see in, I think, 12 or 13 states, including, I mentioned, California, where if you don't affirm this as a parent, you can actually lose your kids. That's what this is for. And so the question is, oh my God, this is horrible. That's hard for a confused or struggling adult to deal with. I'm a little bit lost, honestly, at the moment. How did it get in our schools? And by the way, I started by saying it came before Judith Butler, it came before Michel Foucault's the first queer theorist, but this all goes back to Karl Marx, like I said. It's just oppressor versus oppressed in a new way that twists up American sensibilities about civil rights and caring about people who have a rough shake. Christian values on caring for people who don't have as fair of a deal in society. They call it the social gospel. It's a complete heresy. It's a complete perversion of the gospel, but it's a thing. And so it's really old. It's Marxism. And it's older than Marxism, but we won't get into all that. So how in the world does it get into schools? Well, because leftists don't sleep. Leftists don't rest. There's a famous quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, about how awful the Soviet Union Gulag situation, Soviet Union political situation was, having survived it. And what he said was, you people in Western countries, I know you're tired fighting against the communists. I know you're tired, but the communist who wants your society, he is not tired. He is not tired at all. In fact, they don't get tired. They pump out reams and reams of theory. You know, here's another difference between you and the left. If you went and you said, I don't like what's going on, and you go and you ask, say, I don't think we should have this book in the library, and they say, well, you have to have this book in the library, you might get upset, but you'll say, well, they said it, and you go home. When the right gets told no, or the right loses, they go home. When the left loses anything, the smallest thing, an emoji on Twitter, not even on their phones in general, just on Twitter, they flip out. They flip out. You look at this breakdancer from Australia. Do you guys see this? So it's the judge's fault, it's society's fault, it's sexism, blah, 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 blah. It's always somebody else's fault, and they are fully entitled to go to war. This Jasmine Crockett lady that's in Congress. made a fool of. I think she gets primaried or something like this. And then, no, it's Cori Bush, sorry. They're all the squad's all the same to me. And so Cori Bush loses, and then Wade decided it was a good idea for whatever reason to wage war on a Jewish charity or whatever that she thinks funded her, or probably did fund her opponent to get her out. And so it's always, when they lose, they come back and hit 3 times as hard the next day. They don't hesitate. This is the difference. They feel fully entitled, they don't sleep, they don't rest. And so when they saw queer theory, of course they thought this needs to go in the schools. Everything is about driving their agenda forward. Everything. So as soon as queer theory was being defined in 1995, it was also being written about in the education literature. But unfortunately, the colleges of education were not ours anymore by 1995. They were theirs. The date that the Marxist historians in education give is that the critical pedagogues, as they're called, using critical education theory, or technically called critical pedagogy, owned our colleges of education across most of North America by 1992. They had enough people and enough positions and enough power to be able to dictate the majority of what went on in education schools in most universities across the entire North American continent by 1992. So now you have these queer theorists thinking, wow, we can get this stuff right in front of kids. And let me just tell you, I've read a lot of queer theory. Much like the books you guys are trying to fight about in the library, and you can't even, you go to these meetings and you read them and they try to fine you for violating some rule, which of course somehow it can be in front of kids. Queer theory has that kind of stuff in every one of its formal academic books too. They're just as dirty, they're just as gross, they're just as graphic, but they also reference in virtually every single work, sometimes on almost every other page, something about children. Not the desire to teach children queer theory, something more explicit about children. For example, and I won't use a gross one, the exact same paragraph where David Halperin defines queer for the first time, as I just explained. If you read about 2 sentences down from the whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant as his definition, about 2 sentences down, he says it can mean a lot of things. It could mean, for example, it doesn't just have to mean gays and lesbians. He reiterates that it's not about sexuality. It doesn't just have to mean that. He said it could be married couples without children, because that's not normative. It's normal that married couples that do have children. And I guess he's primarily meaning couples that decide intentionally not to have children, but I don't know, he doesn't specify. And then he goes on and he says, or it could be married couples with children, perhaps in italics, very naughty children. They can't leave it alone. So they see an opportunity, and of course they work it in. And they have their in through the education schools, because critical pedagogy has already taken over our ed schools roughly at the same time queer theory is developing. And so, what's critical pedagogy? Because this queer pedagogy is the fusion of critical theory and critical education into queer theory. How do you get to this? Well, critical pedagogy comes from a guy named Paulo Freire. Ultimately, I've actually spoken here in Charleston about Paulo Freire before, and my earlier book called The Marxification of Education talks about him in tremendous detail, telling you what he does. So Paulo Freire has this concept, a new concept of education he developed as a Marxist, by the way, and as a liberation theologian. So actually, as a theologian, he developed a form of religious values instruction. He said in order to teach it, you have to go through your own personal Easter and die and be resurrected. That's his word, on the side of the oppressed. You have to have a personal relationship with the oppressed, like a personal relationship with Jesus for Christians. And he says that this is the true meaning of Easter. The true meaning of Easter is to die and be reborn on the side of the oppressed. And he calls the Easter that Christians celebrate commemorative rhetoric, a mere date on the calendar. He says that it's dead with no hope of resurrection. So the Christian Easter is getting stamped underfoot and elevated into this new woke, fake heresy of Easter. I mean, it's so disgusting, I'm like stalling out here. This is what he says it takes to be actually a true educator. In other words, like I said earlier, like Marx believed, or like Herbert Marcuse believed, you have to have that qualitative transformation inside of yourself. Transform, by the way, is one of their favorite words, you may have noticed. Any document you see in education that talks about transformative, transform education, transform this, transform that, transform the kids, That's Marxism. Almost definitely. Not 100% of the time, but it's enough of a red flag to start asking the question and looking into it more deeply and putting together a case one way or the other. And it's almost always Marxism, because you're supposed to transform yourself into who you really are in Marxism, which is a socialist. The belief is that you are intrinsically a socialist, and capitalism alienates you from your true human nature, which is socialist. So you're returning to your true nature, your true human nature, by becoming socialist. Well, queer theory actually turns out to say the exact same thing. It says that our true nature is queer, but that society and education straighten kids out. That's the phrasing they use, straightens them out. And so you have to introduce this as early as possible to them. There are other reasons why they target kids and why they try to destroy childhood innocence as an idea that we can surmise. We don't have to say them out loud. We know what they are. But they're very interested in the idea that the children have to be introduced to this queer ideology, which prevents them from learning to develop category thinking. Boy, girl, man, woman. Good, bad, safe, dangerous. Family, stranger. They want that category thinking very blurry. They want it queered, as they say. And they do this with children for a lot of reasons. One is that they're a captive audience in schools. One is that they're children. They'll believe literally almost anything you tell them. If you went up to a 47-year-old man and said, did you know that you might actually be a girl inside and that there are 97 pronouns, they would say, no. What's wrong with you? Can I take you to the hospital? Did you hit your head? I mean, seriously. And they would think that that's oppression, that this is the way that it is. But with a child, wow, really? And let's get out the coloring books and color the flag for which gender you are. And there's 100 of them, and all of them are really cool, pretty colors, bright rainbow colors. But for the sexualities, do you know what the flag for, there's a flag for straight. Do you know what it looks like? You know, picture the trans flag, right? So it's the blue and the pink and the white and then the pink and the blue. Same structure, 5 stripes, but it's dark gray, white, light gray, dark gray. So you can have one of the colorful flags, or you can have the gray flag.
Yeah.
That's called brainwashing, folks. That's called brainwashing. What I want to tell you about Paulo Freire is this is really all I really want to tell you, is just to give you an idea how old this is. Paulo Freire uses this concept for education that he calls generative themes. I'm not going to get into what generative themes are, except to say that they are intentionally, emotionally engaging concepts that are familiar to the person, the student's life. So you're going to deal with something that kids will know what it is, and it gets them excited, or it makes them scared, or it stresses them out. You're going to get their emotions engaged, but it has to be something that's relevant to their personal life. Like I said, it's a personal relationship with the oppressed. And you use education, Paulo Freire says, as an excuse through this generative theme method to get the kids excited about something and then switch from the academic material to a political conversation. His phrasing for that, his exact phrasing is that the academic material, or the literacy lesson for him, because he was only talking about literacy, he wasn't talking about math, the literacy lesson is a mediator to political knowledge. So the point is to have a political conversation. Now if you read his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, from 1970, which is his magnum opus, and a footnote right after he describes how this works, footnote number 10 in chapter 1, I've had to cite it a few times, he says that this method is derived from the Cultural Revolution led by Mao Zedong. And then I recently found out, I was like, ha, got it. Dead to rights, there it is, right? And then I recently found out that Lenin wrote in the 20s and 21 that actually there's no such thing as education that isn't also political education. So actually he stole the idea from Lenin 100 years ago, through Mao. So this is a long tide, in other words, that we're talking about here when I say the tide is turning. It's a 100-year tide. So I've talked enough about all this history. You guys are actually starting to catch up with me. I find that I go places and people are actually, either they already know everything I'm going to say, or they're sometimes saying stuff to me, I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that. Like you guys are off doing your own reading. I strongly encourage people, by the way, to learn to speak leftist. You can immediately see basically straight through everything Madam Vice President says. We're being formal as a means of slighting her. Kamala. President Trump recently said, he got in trouble for it, he said, yeah, I had a bunch of consultants, they said there's like 7 ways to say your name. I don't know, they tell me the right way. I don't care how to say it, actually, I just don't care. And I think this is the right attitude to have, frankly. Kamala makes them mad, they get really upset, so she's Kamala now. Kamala. Really drag it out, Kamala. Right? It makes them really mad. For some reason, this really flips them out. It's like a feminist with a doctorate that you don't call doctor. Like Joe Biden. They get really upset. So anyway, I like that. Sun Tzu said that if your enemies of choleric temper, irritate them. So, Kamala it is. If they're easily made mad, make them look bad. Tim Walz is a perfect example. But I digress into the politics again. Because I want to talk about what it's like. So I want you to understand, first of all, that I said at the start that we're at the turning of this tide. And what I've given you is just a taste of what we're dealing with in the schools. I mean, we know that I could go on for like 11,000 hours about each of these topics if we had to. And I don't care to do that. You can listen to my podcast. I've done like 80 billion of them. I think I'm almost at like 700 hours of podcast right now. So somebody emailed me the other day, one of my friends from way back in real life texted me and she said, I finally finished listening to all your podcasts. And I was like, whoa. I don't think I've listened to them all yet. What I wanted to make the point though is that if this is the tide, right? Normally the tide goes in and out twice a day. I don't know if you know how the tide works, but it goes in and out twice a day. I mean, you're in Charleston, so if you don't know how the tide works here, I guess I speak all over the place. And everybody has tides, guys, I'm sorry. If you don't know how it works here, you might need to see a specialist. But it goes in and out twice a day, so look at me, mountain people. It goes in and out twice a day, so it's about every 6 hours there's a switch, right? Okay, so we get this idea. This tide has been coming in for a century. So if you think that the turning of the tide means that, oh wow, we've got some good candidates, we've got 5 out of 9 or whatever, we've got 7 out of 13 or whatever the deal is, we got whatever it is we need to win, blah blah blah, we got a great attorney general, people are waking up, back to day-to-day life, just want to be left alone, you don't understand what's going on. This is I don't think we're going to need 100 years to push the tide all the way back out, but we're going to need some time. And education is in particular an important field, and it's going to take a lot longer because they've been so diligent about taking over education. So I want to talk for a second about why did they take over education with so much diligence, so much persistence, so much intention. Why did they dive in so vigorously? Why does that history book that the Marxists wrote about their own educational process, it's called The Critical Turning in Education by Isaac Gottesman, if you want to check my references. The first sentence of the book says, where did all the 60s radicals go? Not to the religious cults, not to yuppiedom, to the classroom.
Yeah.
Why were they so hell-bent on getting into education and taking over education so that they actually had full command of it by 92? They did not have command of the Democratic Party in 92. They did not have command of the Republican Party in 1992. They did not have command of the business environment in 1992, but they had control of colleges of education. They really cared about that. Why? Because they understand something that's absolutely true, absolutely important, that every parent knows in their gut and that every tyrant has exploited in history, which is that, as Hitler put it, controversially for Moms for Liberty, he who has the children gains the future.
Yeah.
The children are the future. Their logic is if we get the colleges of education, then we get the teachers. And if we get the teachers, we get the next generation of students, and if we get the students, we get the future. They understand that. They completely understand that. So they have worked extremely hard to take over education, and it's going to be the hardest fight to get it back out. But it's also, even though it's one of these political things that just kind of slips off the table, whoops, we forgot about it, there's the economy, whoops, we forgot about it, there's the border, whoops, we forgot about it, there's the poly crisis and 47 5-alarm fires, the new one comes up every 3 days. Whoops, education slipped off the table, not for Moms for Liberty though. Never slips off the table for Moms for Liberty, which is why you need this organization, why this organization needs to keep growing and having more and more fire bringing to the table. It slips off the table so easily, but it's the single most important of all of the dimensions of education. Because if you lose control of education and allow your enemies to educate your children will turn on you. And that's exactly what happened. Queer theory is perhaps the most devious and successful tool for turning children against parents that has ever been. Critical theory overall, including Howard Zinn's history, people's history of the United States, riddled with lies, utter nonsense, taught in so many schools you wouldn't believe it. The goal of that is to get the kids to hate their country. To think, yeah man, we live in America, but it did a lot of bad stuff. Like it's really, like Christopher Columbus, really bad. Like Civil War, really bad. Racism, really bad. Ooh, and my grandparents were probably on the wrong side of this, and my parents, now you're tearing up the family too. And it was Christians that fought to keep stuff in place. So my religion's bad too. And you can start to pull every single, what am I talking about there? What do you pull up when you pull every single one of those up? You're pulling up the roots to their soul. So that the communists can capture their soul to transform them into what the communists believe they are by nature, which is communists. Or in the modern parlance, queer. It's the same thing. Of course, they don't have any use for these poor, indoctrinated, disruptive kids that they produce, so they're the first against the wall after the revolution. So it's like doubly tragic because communism turns out to be pretty evil. But this is why you have to fight so hard for education. This is why you have to fight so hard to stand in the gap between this ideology and children. And this is why you have to do everything you can. Knock doors, give money, support candidates, throw your hat in the ring yourself to get involved and protect kids and win this fight, especially since the big political players are going to find 47 excuses by the end of the week to forget all about education. So even if all you're doing is calling your state rep and reminding him again and again and again and again, this is important, this is important, this is important, they need that. I've talked to enough reps and enough congressmen now to know. Byron Donalds told me directly, Congressman Donalds told me, if somebody's not telling me again and again and again what the important issues are, I've got 3,000 issues I forget. It's not that I'm malicious, it's not that I'm a bad guy, I just can't remember. There's too many. I have, 200 phone calls a day. It's too many, so you've got to be an advocate. And like Tara said, you're the number one stakeholder. Was it you that said you're number one stakeholder for your children? One of the, I don't want to steal valor here either. So, one of the Michelle Lieber?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I thought you meant.
Cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Said that your parents are the number one stakeholder in their children's lives. This is true. Actually, you're the number one. You're more of a stakeholder in your children's future than your children, because your children are children, and they don't have the foresight. They don't have the planning. They don't know what their future is going to look like. This is why they can't consent to puberty blockers or sex change operations, because they don't know what it is to be an adult. They don't know what they're leaving on the table. And I guarantee you that until I was probably close to 30, my mom probably cared more about my future than I did. Because you have to grow up to care about your future.
That's right.
And so you guys are the advocates. You guys have got to get up and go to bed every day. And maybe it's the smallest thing in the world that you're just having another family dinner with no devices. And maybe it's the biggest thing in the world and you're running for office or you're out knocking doors or something even bigger than that. You're running a chapter for Moms, who knows? There's a lot of things you can do. I'm not going to tell anybody specifically things they can do because this is what y'all do on the ground. This is grassroots. I get the privilege of not having to have answers to those hard questions. I get to fly around and say nice sounding things. I'm probably about to preach a little bit though. Because most of my actual kind of solutions are very dispositional, and actually it turns out, sort of ironically, I determined that most of them came out of the gospel and the Bible. So it's like, well, there they are. I didn't invent anything. Nothing new under the sun, I think, is in that book too somewhere. So let's talk about some things. What do you do? How do we deal with this? Well, we got the joyful warrior idea, Moms for Liberty, right? What does that mean? Well, in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, Jesus says, I send you out, and obviously this means he's talking to his disciples, and they're going to go into a dangerous situation. So I send you out, you need to be as wise as serpents and gentle as doves. Well, that's 2 commandments. Why not? You need to not forget either one of them, right? So you need to be discerning. That's why I said learn to speak leftist. You need to tell when they're saying something that's communist. You need to understand that when Kamala Harris stands up and says, able to see what can be unburdened by what has been, that doesn't just ring like word salad, that actually might be something bad. When she stands up the other day, this was the big one, how are you going to pay for all this? A journalist finally caught her. How are you going to pay for all this? She's like, oh, well, the return on investment, blah, 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 return on investment, return on investment. People are like, oh, another Kamala word salad. No, it's not. She said we need to critically reevaluate how we measure return on investment. Uh-oh, critical theory, critical this, critical that. You've seen it enough times. Critical race theory. Critically reevaluate how we measure return on investment. So she says, well, it has return on investment. She said that 4 times in a row or 5 times in a row like an idiot, because she knows that's the talking point answer. And then she says we have to critically reevaluate what that even means, which means she's using cooked books. She's using communist definition for return on investment. And then what does she give as examples for her return on investment? When you are strengthening communities and strengthening neighborhoods. Very vague, very communist sounding things. You have to get discerning. But you also have to maintain your gentleness. It's not enough to say, oh my God, we're up against commies, we've got to throw them out of helicopters. Because that turns out to be just as dehumanizing to you as communism is to them in the first place. Jesus, not to get preachy with you, but Jesus drove the demons out and made fellowship with the person. He didn't say, whoops, that guy's got demons. Lightning.
Right.
He drove out the demons, he didn't tolerate the evil, and then he made fellowship. So you have to be gentle as well. You have to go out and you have to make the argument. You have to be patient. I encourage you, if whether you like Charlie Kirk or not, I encourage you to watch his manner. He's extremely good at staying extremely calm. He doesn't always, he very frequently does say the right thing. He doesn't always say the right thing or the best thing he can say. He doesn't always have the quickest comeback. But and I think it's overwhelmingly, he's a 30-year-old man for goodness sake, overwhelmingly maintains his composure, I think, because of his faith. So I encourage you to remember that you have to keep both of those. There's the way that the Marxists subvert your religious beliefs is they'll take something like that with 2 commandments. They'll say, look, Jesus said, it says, you know, the book says, the gospel says, be as wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And communists will come along and say, Jesus said, be gentle. So that way you'll just kind of roll over and affirm whatever they say. You'll wear a mask to love thy neighbor and all of that. You get it all wrong, right? And then things start going wrong and they'll say, by the way, did you notice things are going bad? And they might be communists dressed as Republicans. This is a thing. There's an old saying in radical literature, dress as a Republican so you can speak as an anarchist. And they come along and they say, gentle is not working. Maybe we need to stop being gentle. Maybe we need to, get right back in their face and take power and wield it back against them. And now, rather than getting back to what you're supposed to do in the commandment, now you've thrown out both sides of the commandment, you've lost it completely. And you've been totally subverted. It's very important to get this clarity, this discernment. You've got to spend time thinking, reading, talking with people. These meetings that we're talking about, getting together at people's houses, having these dinners or whatever else, building a community, going door knocking together. These things are really going to build you guys up. And they're going to help you. One of the purposes was sharing information, right? Getting informed. You guys are getting your basis to where you're going to be able to be discerning and maintain your gentleness in the face of all the lies and slander that you're facing. You can't just stop. Okay? Like I mentioned earlier, the left, when they lose, they get mad, right? And they come back even harder. That's important. So what happens? When you win, when the left wins, what do? Do they stop? Look at the UK.
Oh, yeah.
The Labour Party, which is the Fabian Socialist Party, just took over. If they stopped, no, they provoked every bit of racial animus they could possibly do, installed 2-tier policing. They're now emptying the prisons of violent criminals to house the protesters who are protesting against the immigration issue and the violent Muslim people that are in the streets causing literal stabbings, including of children and other things. So they're locking up the people saying no more of this. They aren't even being violent themselves. They're arresting people for tweets. Literally, for tweets. They're threatening to try to extradite Americans to arrest them. Good luck. We had 1776 for a reason, UK. We're not going back, I think is the phrase. Right? Okay, so when they win, they consolidate power. I'm not saying, in fact, I just said that consolidating power isn't quite the right way. But when you win, it's not time to go to sleep, it's time to start work. So you win the school board. Well, you need, if it's a bare majority, you better keep your people on it and you better get more. They say you have all of the school board or whatever. You think you're done? No. This is like coming home and you're out and your teenagers are having a party and you come in and they're having a party and you scream and they all run away and the house is wrecked. All right, we got the kids out. We're in control again. We're done. No, all the cleanup starts now. Now that you've recovered order of the environment, you've got to set the environment back in order. If you get to work, this is also very biblical. If you get to work, I'm just going to say 2 more things about what to do. But the point on that was, when you win, work harder, not less. The left does, and they consolidate their gains as quickly and as effectively as they can. You've got to put your stewardship into action when you've been given stewardship. That's the Good Shepherd point, by the way. So So there's another important one. What do you do? Well, I don't know what your talents are. This is one of my favorite jokes. I'm going to ruin it by saying it's a joke. Some people are people of high talent, and other people don't have as many talents. There are people of middle talent. So you have people of high talent, and you have people of middle talent, and just to be fair, you also have Democrats. If there's any here, it's a joke. If you're offended, that's okay. I don't care. It's a joke. Ricky Gervais said, the difference between you and me is you're offended and I think it's funny, that's why I'm happier than you. But you have talents, and the Bible tells you, the gospel tells you what you have to do with your talents. You have to double them. You can't bury them in the sand and wait until some future date and give them back or whatever. You have to go out and put them to work and double them. So if you know how to get 25 people to your house to have a party, I hope you have 50 soon at your party. If you have 5 or 6 volunteers that show up to door knock, I hope that the next time you have 10 to 12. And then each one of those things builds and builds and builds. The next time when you guys start having one of these big meetings again here, that 400 or 500, we can't even fit in this room, 400 or 500 people are here. Get the numbers behind you, build your community, whatever it happens to be, and do what your talents are to build and build and build that. If you get involved in office, learn what it takes to do what you have to do and do it effectively and do it better every single day. These are things that you have to do in order to be the good steward. And so the last one is no complaining. I'm going to tell you something. I said this on stage with Charlie Kirk, and thousands of people saw it as a scandal, so I'll say it to you guys. I don't know if y'all know where I'm at religiously. It doesn't really matter, but technically I'm not religious. And so here I am, a few weeks ago, on a plane, about to take off on an O'Hare runway. Literally, we're like turning, it's almost over, and what happens? Donald Trump gets shot. So my phone immediately gives me 3,500 text messages, they shot Trump. And I'm like about to take off where there's no signal on this one little plane that doesn't have Wi-Fi. I'm like, I'm not gonna know what's going on. And so I'm like, did they shoot him or did they like shoot at him? And they're like, well, it hit him, but he's okay. And then I look on the Twitter, and there's already the pictures of him fight, right? And I'm like, I had to watch the video, and he's, and I'm like, I think I just saw a miracle. All right. I don't know if I did or not. I'm just saying. I think I did, though, when I'm chewing on this. But here's what I do know. If I did, I read the book of Numbers, which should be called Stop Complaining. Because the point of the book of Numbers, if you haven't read your Bible in a while, and I get that some of that book's a little dull. There's the dull part and the story part. If you haven't read that book in a while, what's going on is that they are finally getting toward the promised land of Canaan. But the people are complaining. In fact, they're like, we want to go back to Egypt. They had cucumbers there. Slavery wasn't so bad. We had cucumbers. I'm not joking. It's really there. Right? And so, they're complaining, and they're complaining, and they're complaining, and God's like, that's it. They don't go in. In fact, maybe not quite to hell with them, but it's something to that effect. And Moses is like, hold on, God. Hold on. And he's like, all right, fine. I won't condemn them, but they still can't go in because all they do is whine and complain. I gave them 10 examples, and 10 is a symbolic number here. It means lots and lots and lots of miracles. For goodness sakes, they're allegedly eating manna every day. Miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle saying that I will take care of you, although you don't know when you'll be delivered. You don't know the timing, as we heard in the prayer. Example after example after example, and you don't have any gratitude. You don't recognize it. You're still complaining. You're still, woe is me. It was better in a different way. Okay, so if I just saw a miracle, which maybe I didn't, I bet a lot of you believe that you did, with Trump. I don't know why he was spared, if that's what happened, but he was, it appears. If we just saw a miracle, we have no room to complain. We only have to work. And if we bounce that off of Genesis 4, where Cain and Abel have their spat, we'll call it a spat. The story there was that Abel was making the sacrifice of the fats of the first fruit of his flock, and Cain was making kind of a low-grade offering out of not such best fruit that he was picking from his plants, his trees, his groves. And so God smiled on Abel but didn't smile on Cain. Cain got upset, displaced the blame off of himself onto his brother, took a rock, took care of business. Bad mojo, right? So there's a story there. What I want to tell you is if you want to win, if you want to deserve to win, if you want to be miracle worthy, you have to sacrifice. You have to give up some of your time. You have to give up some of your money. You need to be door knocking. You need to be putting money behind candidates that can make a difference in your community. You need to sacrifice. You need to be willing to stand there and get called names and not care because you know you're doing the right thing. You have to be willing to lose the friends who aren't willing to stand with you for the right thing because communism is on the ballot. This is real. This is not a joke. So you need to be willing to sacrifice that pride, to call the thing what it is, to stand up in front of people and say, this is wrong. I just heard a man speak up in Chicago and say, I tried to speak up about this recently, and what happened was immediately I was called a transphobe. And within 5 minutes they were calling me a racist, and it doesn't even make sense. They just had progressed through the whole list. And then he said, I don't know what to do because I don't want to be called those things in my social circle. But then he started like kind of doing the thing that the book of Numbers says don't do. Right? And I was thinking, that guy's not going to make it to Canaan, and NGMI, as the Gen Z says, not going to make it. And I thought, he's held hostage by what he won't sacrifice, with his social circle, with his job, with his friends, with his reputation. And until he's willing to make those sacrifices, like so many of us already have, he's not miracle worthy. So if you want to get out of this, figure out what your talents are and how to multiply them and put them to work. Do it today. If you want to get out of this, figure out what is a real sacrifice worth making, and of course, it's not that you have to just give away everything like a fool. And make the sacrifices. Make smart, meaningful sacrifices to do the right thing. Because one last Bible quote, I forgot, book of James somewhere, it says, for he who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin. Let that weigh on you. We can get out of this. This is a turning point in history, and the tide is turning in our favor. We need to keep pushing. We need to work harder. Thank you for bringing me to talk.
And just so you know, all the stuff you talked about, we do have it in South Carolina. Y'all know that, right? Yes. Okay. In the history books, all this, everything he was saying, we've got that drag queen that just got fired recently. Thank you very much for that. Oh yeah, so
Tell the story.
Yeah, he was well, I don't have time to tell the story. Steve, what's your question?
Oh, listen, James, every time I hear you, you get better, so thank you so much.
Yeah.
100 years ago, maybe 50, at my college campus, everybody I knew had a copy of One Dimensional Man under their arm, Herbert Marcuse. And for the first time, I understand the story there. I was a young man, and so I wasn't really understanding it. But that whole sense about using sexuality to break through all sense of normal. So I had an epiphany while you were talking.
Oh, well, thank you. I will tell you, by the way, first of all, let me thank you for the kindest curse possible. Every time I speak, I get better. It means that sooner or later, what goes up must come down. I'm glad I didn't bomb tonight, but we'll see what happens. So Herbert Marcuse was the most influential Marxist probably in the Western world at least. I mean, we're not going to compete against Mao or Stalin in the East, but in the Western world, he was probably the most influential of the Marxists of the middle of the 20th century. And like Gene just said, every student he knew in college had a copy of his book under his arm. In 1964, the year that One Dimensional Man came out, which is his kind of biggest, most famous book, over 300,000 copies sold that year. This guy was a rock star. His influence actually cannot even be, you can't even understand how big a deal this guy was. He was the father of the New Left, and he, by the way, explicitly said that he was importing, what? Maoism into America. So I say that the fruits of his work were American Maoism. He's hard to read, but I do encourage you, if you have time to read, or listen to some of my podcasts where I read through Herbert Marcuse for yourself. The starting place is an essay called Repressive Tolerance that he wrote the next year. But actually, through these works in the 60s, not just the breaking through of sexuality, to destroy all norms, which is especially from his 1955 book called Eros and Civilization. And the stuff in the 60s, he actually sets the stage for the world we live in today, because he says that socialism as it exists in the world, like Soviet Union, and capitalism actually are not that different from one another. And of course neither works, because neither has that qualitative change inside. And he says the problem with capitalism is that it produces goods and stabilizes the workers. So we don't need to have a working class as the base of revolution anymore. So now they can go into corporate power and other forms of power. They don't have a fealty to the they don't have any loyalty left to the working class. They're abandoning them for identity politics, is what he says, to put in its place. But he also says that that capitalism produces, but it's not sustainable, right? So that's the buzzword of our decade, or our time, right? Sustainability and inclusion. So that is on the one side. He says socialism, on the other hand, has the right idea, but it's not generating that qualitative change, and part of the reason is that it can't produce. So if you could produce a productive socialism, by the way, that's what they did in China by opening literally a fascist market within under the Chinese government for the glory of communism. That's called Deng Xiaoping theory. It came after Mao died. And then if you could get a bridle on capitalism with ESG scores to make it more sustainable and inclusive, then you would actually have two competing corporate communist systems. That means you really only have one system throughout the whole world. So if you wonder the big picture of why all of this is happening and why it's coordinated through the CCP and the United Nations and so on, that's the big picture story. And it starts with this character that Gene said when he was in college, every other person had a copy of that book underneath their arms because he was that influential. So he's the father of the New Left. He also said in 1972 that after his revolution in 68 didn't work, that what had to happen was people needed to go into the professions and preach their ideology within their jobs and get the job done, bringing socialism in. And what he said in particular is that it needs to happen in education at all levels. And that's what actually started the long march through the institutions in the United States. It's this same guy. So you can't underestimate his influence and his importance. He's the architect of basically the whole world that we have today. Like I said, he's a hard read, but I do encourage you to try to pick up some of his stuff and read it. Herbert Marcuse. So you probably pronounce it on first sight as Marcuse. M-A-R-C-U-S-E.
Herbert Marcuse, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was good. Thank you. Okay, I just want to say this real quick. Carlton is here. That just, I don't know when you got here. Sorry, I didn't see you earlier. And anyway, he's running for House seat. Wait, what's your district?
House seat 15. It's North Charleston, Hanahan, New Street.
Yeah, but just real quick. So yeah, I'll just tell it real quick. He did go to Park Circle, you know, the drag queen stuff that was going on in June, and he videotaped it, and we were able to send it to the district. And that one of the drag queens there was an employee at CCSD, a teacher. I know you're going to say it, and he was actually a counselor. So when James is talking about these counselors, and he was bragging about it, you know, kids, and then he kept telling kids to just keep. He said he was, you know, what they do is they perform, and then they read a book that's in the LGBTQ theme to the children. And his thing was you know, the butterfly, right? The caterpillar transitioning. So he says, we're all going to transition. And he said, listen, if you think you're a butterfly and you're still a caterpillar, don't give up on your transition. So we got this on, he got it on video. I just wanted you to know that yes, we have that.
I went on a recon mission.
Yeah.
I read about, it's going to be story time with drag queens for children. And I was like, man, should I go? I was like, go do it, man. I sat there and filmed this. It was horrible. If you can, donate to my campaign, votecarlwalker.com. Put me in, coach, is my slogan. I'm running against J.A. Moore. His website that I created is No More J.A. Moore. He's for men and girls sports. He voted against stopping little kids from being transitioned. I mean, what else do I need to say?
And one more thing, sorry.
This district.
Yeah, it's Mike Van, where's Mike? I'm sorry, y'all. He's running for treasurer. He's got to win. Yes, go Mike.
I just comment real quickly on this caterpillar story, which I hadn't heard before. I just point out the caterpillar is transforming, right? In fact, he is imagining what can be unburdened by what has been. I'm telling you, that phrase, as dumb as it sounds, is the heartbeat of Marxism.
Yes, okay. Y'all want to do one more questions? And by the way, wait a minute, I know people are leaving. Does anybody have any questions about anything coming up or anything? No, maybe not.
No, I'll take some videos.
No videos! Did anybody video or take pictures tonight?
Yeah.
because I have a video, Corey's videotape, we're gonna put it on our website and we'll share it, but,
And on the
Yeah.
Overton report.
and on, Overton
Right.
Report. Do y'all know Corey Allen with the Overton Report? He does amazing work. Honestly, he does really good investigative reporting for the whole, I would say the low country, but the whole state really, the whole state. So we really need Corey. Yes, Lori. Oh, wait a minute, so the Overton Report, join the Overton Report, and he'll have the video, he'll be playing this meeting on his. So the next meeting, we're not having, that's what I was saying in the beginning, we're gonna not have another, y'all, early voting starts October 21st. So October 21st, it's just right around the corner. That's why I say, let's volunteer, let's get organized in our neighborhoods, let's do this at precinct levels. And we're not gonna try to, we can't top a James Lindsay this year anyway, it's not gonna happen. So we're not gonna have another big meeting till after the elections, but, yeah. So, did you have a question?
There's probably a longer.
One more question.
If there's a continuum and it's people in this room on one side and all the way on the other side, and there's all the people that their head up their behinds are in the sand in the middle that just, so many of my friends aren't even aware of the news and on top of it. But as you move in that continuum to the left, right, so you have the real true believers that fit their sphere, and then you have the sheep that are following them. Like, how do you break down that population? How many are the true believers that really believe this shit?
Okay, so this is a complicated question, but in a sense he's asking me, he says, if you look at the left, you definitely got the true believers, and then you've got kind of a cloud of sheep who are following them. Then you got these people who are kind of the head in the sand, and they're not, they just go which way the wind blows really, they're not really paying attention. Then you got us, that are kind of the resistors and the counter-revolutionaries, as Mal called them. So his question was, how do you break all of this down? I don't want to talk about all the groups, but I'm going to talk about the three, right? Okay, and then the strategy point that's actually very important. So thanks for the question. I won't get into too much detail because we could talk for an hour about this for real, and it's actually really practicable. But it's very difficult to tell, but all cults are organized into kind of three layers. They might be graded within each layer, but there's three basic layers. There's the actual ringleaders of the cult. They're sometimes called the inner circle. Those people are mostly the people that are throwing big bucks at it and that have big political agendas. They might or might not believe the doctrine, or they might believe something related. A lot of us know that a lot of these people don't particularly care one way or the other maybe about trans, but they know it gets them political power, so they're using it cynically to do that. That's fine, it happens. Below them, there's a group that, drawing from the Chinese terminology for this, the two other groups are called the inner circle and the outer circle. So the inner circle are going to be those activists that Charlie's asking about, and the outer circle are going to be the sheep. We're not to the head in the sand asleep people yet. That's a different category altogether. And so these are people that are in the cult, and this is, make no mistake, a cult. One of the things I meant to tell you and didn't is that in queer education, there's this guy, Kevin Kamashiro, that we quoted in Queering of the American Child, who says that the responsibility of an educator doing queer education is to lead the children into emotional crisis and structure the environment around them to resolve the crisis productively. That's called brainwashing, that's called child abuse, but it's called trauma bonding as well.
The name tags now all have the suicide hotlines for schools.
That's right. The goal is to actually traumatize your children in order to give them the political thing that you want them to receive. So telling kids about suicide that they probably never thought about before gets them thinking about it.
Yeah.
So turns out the inner circle mostly knows what they're doing pushing that. Some people in there are grifters who just know how to play the game really well, and they maybe don't believe it, but most of them actually are the true believers who are all in. And they're kind of hard to tell, but the easiest way to tell is that if you ask them kind of a hard question about it, they're going to spit back a paragraph of nonsense at you that uses like 14 words you don't know. The sheep, on the other hand, usually can't do that, and they're just going to call you a transphobe. They're just going to get really mad and call you a name. Now what I want to point out to you at this point is that the sheep are victims of this cult. They are not the perpetrators. The people who are going to vomit back a paragraph of theory at you are actually the perpetrators. And they're actually being driven by ringleaders who are probably cynical manipulators who have other purposes. This is a communist revolution happening in our country, for instance, and I would bet you the people that are funding it do not actually care one way or the other about communism, and have some other really dark religion that's actually pushing it, but communism's great for breaking a country. And so the point isn't necessarily to have a communism, the point is actually to use communists to destroy America. So anyway, The way that you want to deal with this is why I said you have to be discerning, or wise as serpents, but also gentle as doves. You want to be gentle with people who are victims of a cult and try to lead them out. The people in the middle that have their heads in the sand, they're hard to reach because they don't care. They're low engagement, they're low interest, they're low information. They tend to vote Democrat for those reasons. How do I know that? By putting them down? No, I was one of them. People ask all the time, James, you're so smart. Why in the world did you vote Democrat for so many years? Well, I was in a left social circle, and I was in a university, and it's just what everybody did around me, and I thought I was really smart, but I had the shallowest knowledge possible about every single political topic that I've ever talked to, and every single former Democrat that I've talked to said the same thing about why they voted that way too. They don't know what's going on, and in fact, they don't really want to know. Their political knowledge is, you challenged them on something, so they typed it into Google and found something to argue back, that's at the end. And they're not deep. So what your goal is to, you're not going to change that inner circle group, the true believers, like they're locked in, and the grifters, you really won't change grifters. You have to exclude those people from positions of power, and where you can, I point to the DNC at the moment, you want to play those people off of one another, set them up so that they squabble over details of theory. That's actually much harder to do than you think. Their solidarity is really high. But the people that are just the sheep following the cult, you want to catch them, help them find contradictions, help them see through, help them, in other words, take a red pill, and then be a landing pad for them so they'll come out. And the people who are just kind of heads in the sand, just do your best, try to give them information, you'll catch some of them and wake them up. But here's the really important point besides how that breaks down. Percentage-wise, I wouldn't guess, honestly, that more than 15 to 20% of the population of this country, actually the numbers on the trans stuff tell us they're polls. 30% of the population is kind of in that camp to some degree or another, 70% is not. So we have some sense of it. I would say 10% are probably really in, 20% are vaguely in because their friends say they have to be. Everybody else isn't. But the people that are head in the sand just kind of, well, what are we doing? Everybody, that's transphobe, okay, we'll go this way. And that's kind of how it works. You want to wake as many of them up, but here's the mistake people make. You start doing these talks, you start doing these meetings, you start talking to people, and you get really frustrated. I tell people, and they just don't get it, Because here's what's really happening. You're telling people, believe me, I hear this all the time. You saved me, you said this, you woke me up. I've had people tell me I saved their lives. I mean, literally, they're going to commit suicide because they thought they're going crazy. Like, I've had so many different stories. And what happens, when you feel like I can't wake anybody up, let me tell you the actual truth. You're waking up 3 or 4 or 5 out of every 100 you talk to, and then you forgot all about them because you're so mad about the 90 who won't listen to you. So put your energy where it goes. Help those people get up to the next level so this becomes a snowball. One of my favorite quotes in all of literature, it's just cute. I just thought it was cute before, now I think it's extremely serious, and I talk about it a lot, is where, I'm sorry we end on such a dorky note, but we're going to do a Lord of the Rings, which I guess J.D. Vance made cool, so we can do that. So, there's the tree. If you don't know Lord of the Rings, you're lost. I'm not fixing that for you. We want to go home. But just watch the movies. I can't believe I said that. Read the book. Don't watch the movies, read the book. But there's the tree people, and the tree people are super strong and go basically save the day in a major way. And it turns out the tree people are hard to get motivated. And it turns out that the 2 little hobbits that got captured by the orcs got dragged off to where the tree people are, and we're just telling them what was going on in the world. And then the tree people get roused and go break Isengard and all this stuff. So that's the point of the story. But the way Gandalf the wizard characterizes this, he says, I think the coming of those 2 little hobbits to Fangorn Forest, where the tree people live, is like the felling of 2 small stones that started an avalanche. So when you think that you're too small to make a difference, you need to think of that. A small stone being kicked can start an avalanche that changes the landscape. I'll tell you one example of this in real life, right? One example, and then everybody can go home. My friend Billboard Chris Elston, a lot of you will have heard of him. He wears billboards that say things like, kids cannot consent to puberty blockers, and goes and starts conversations. He's had tens of thousands of conversations. He's spoken in front of parliaments. He's spoken in front of Congress. He meets with congressmen all the time. He meets with state legislators. This man is changing the world single-handedly. It's amazing to watch. Why did this happen? He went out to lunch one day a few years ago. He has 2 young girls. They're teenagers now. They were like 8 at the time. And he went out to lunch, and somebody said something about, he had heard that they're doing this thing with puberty blockers. And Chris was like, what are those? So he went home and he typed into a search engine and he says, oh wow, they are exactly what they sound like they are. And something stirred in his head, and now the man's changing the world. So somebody, not thinking one or thing, nobody, I don't even know who this guy is, Chris probably does. Somebody just in casual conversation said, it's crazy, they're doing puberty blockers to kids. And Chris, something set off in his brain and he became an avalanche. He was the tree people that went and busted Isengard. And so you don't know what difference you're making if you're standing up and telling the truth, even if you're only telling it at the dinner table, if you're only telling it at a restaurant table. So don't underestimate yourself. Don't think you're too small. If you're part of this organization, you're not. But always, always keep in the back of your head that you might be kicking a stone by telling the truth that's going to set off an avalanche that changes your state of the world.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, thank you. And by the way, if you want to stay informed, please join our chapter. And I need your email address to add you to our email list. Because I know Lori was asking when is the next meeting. But really, that's the best way that we can inform everybody. So, and if you're not receiving emails, I'm using Constant Contact now. So please let me know. So put your email down in the back, write it down. There's somewhere, there's somewhere they can.
Nice shot, sir.
So